Welcome back to another episode of Perkins Pipes. Got the Savinelli Bing's favorite out. Oh, yeah, there's a reason for this one. In particular, because of my dad this time. I often think about the Bing because of my mom, enjoying Bing Crosby, but also Bing was a golfer and got the golf club and ball on here, and that makes me think of my dad, and there's a little bit of a reason for that. So, as always, let's get this guy lit. Let's get to talking. I've shared with you before the Roman poet Catullus. Who lived from 84 to 54 BC. Now, this is not an episode of pipe and verse, because we're not going to go deep into the poetry. It's Latin, so we're not going to do that here. But one of his poems is absolutely extraordinary. It's poem number 101 in his collection of 116 poems, and the about roughly the first half, not a little bit more than that, but roughly the first half of the collection is what we call the polymetrics. So lots of different meters, and he plays a lot with different structures of poetry. And roughly the second half is all the poems are what we call elegiac couplets. The first line of each couplet is hendecasyllabic, and I'm sorry, I take it back, is dactylic hexameter. Many of his poems in the polymetrics were hendecasyllabic, which meant they had 11 syllables in them. That's all that means. But the elegiac couplets, the first line is dactylic hexameter, and the second line is dactylic pentameter, alternating back and forth. There you go. Poem 101 is about the death of his brother. And although some of his poems can be quite bawdy, actually moving on over into raunchy, Poem 101 is one of the most poignant, touching pieces you're ever going to read. Has one of the most famous lines in literature, Latin or otherwise, as the concluding line of the poem. And Catullus does something that the really great artists do, graphic artists, musical artists, literary artists, and we've talked about that on this channel. He's able to connect with the here and now of his own time, in this case his own grief. Well, he also transcends into something greater and something that goes across time. So even though he wrote this over 2,000 years ago, there's something to it that can touch every one of us. And I don't care what continent you live on, I don't care what country you live in, what time period it is. There's something about this that touches everybody. I'll give you a little bit of background. Catullus had done his military duty in the province of Bithynia, near the Black Sea. He was on his way home, and he stopped at the grave of his brother. And we don't really know a lot in this regard. We would assume that his brother died, probably in military service as well. And as I always point out to my students, most people really did not travel much in the ancient world. It's often been said that people didn't get much more than 100 miles from their birthplace. Unless you were in the military, unless you were a merchant, or God forbid, unless you were a slave. So by Catullus saying, hey, I'm here at the tomb of my brother, I'm going to pay the family respects. All right, so it's reasonable to think that, other family would not have been able to get over to see this. And so Catullus is going to honor his brother by paying the family respects. And so he does. And he ends up writing this exquisite poem about it. So poem 101 by Catullus. Let's see here. Here we go. He says, multus per gentes, et multa per aequora vectus advenio has miseras frater ad inferias. There's the first couplet, the first two lines. And he says, having traveled through many nations and across many seas, he says, I come to these wretched funeral rites, brother. Ut te postremo donare munera mortis, so that at last I may present you with the service of death. And here is the first deeply touching line. Et mutam nequique qua loquerer cinerem. And so that I might address your mute ashes in vain. Let that sink in. Quando quidem fortuna mihi tete obstulit ipsum. Since fortune has stolen you away from me, you yourself. Alas, heu miser, indigne frater adempte mihi. Alas, miserable or wretched brother, unworthily taken from me. Nunc tamen, interia haec prisco quae more parentum traditus sunt tristi munerad fenderias. Now, however, in the meantime, these things which have been handed down in the ancient custom of our parents as a sad offering for funeral rites, accipe. He says, accipe fraterno multum manantia fletu. Accept them, flowing with much brotherly weeping. And here comes the famous last line, ad quin perpetuum frater avatque vale. And into eternity, brother. Hail and farewell. Now, it's just 10 lines. Gorgeous, gorgeous little poem. I think of my dad. My dad was the first really close person that I lost. Very fortunate in that regard. I'd lost both my grandmothers. Both my grandfathers had passed long before I was born. Knew both my grandmothers and was of age when they passed. Was an adult when one of them passed. Yet my father was the first person to pass that was really close to me in terms of family. So I gave the eulogy. No easy thing, I assure you. And as I was pulling things together, what does a son say? What do you say in this situation? And being a literary guy, I went to literature. I went to poems and, of course, scripture. And I talked about some of his favorite hymns and all that stuff. And I thought of this poem. That's why I brought the Bing out for this. I thought of this poem. I didn't use it, as I recall, but I considered it. Why does this poem connect so well across the ages? Well, he starts off fairly modestly. He says, through many nations, across many seas I've traveled. All right, literally true. He was over on the Black Sea, coming back home. That's just fact. This is to come at last to these wretched funeral rites, and now we get our first hint of feeling when he says miseras. That's where we get our word miserable, misery, wretched funeral rites. And you're going to find out why they're more wretched than they would be for just anybody. Anybody suffering loss, right? A funeral is not a pleasant time. This is so I might present you with this last gift of death. Now, it's last because it's about death. But it's also the last because it's unlikely that Catullus himself is going to get back to this part of the world, so this is the last time this is going to happen. But here's the key line, or the first of the key lines. He says, and so that I might address in vain your mute ashes. Now, I always use this as an example with my students. People think the ancient world, they had these beliefs about the underworld and these tortures and the river Styx and all this kind of stuff, and stuff that was the forerunner to Dante and the Inferno, and that's true. But many people, especially the more educated, upper classes, didn't necessarily go in for that. That was kind of folk belief. You might subscribe to a particular school philosophy, maybe nothing at all. And Catullus is addressing the very real fact for him. I am addressing mute ashes in vain. Why? Because you can't talk back to me, and you can't hear me either. It's something to do. It's what we do as a culture, we Romans. But I know you can't hear this. I don't believe that there is an afterlife. And right away we feel that, that poignancy, that tug at the heart. And then he says, how fortune has stolen you away from me. You yourself. The word ipsum is an intensive pronoun in Latin. You yourself. Just dumb luck, random chance. Now, what does that mean? Don't know. Again, brother killed in the war. Does suggest maybe that he was on the younger side. All right, we don't tend to say that of a 90-year-old. Someone who's lived a long life. We come to expect that. It's not pleasant, but we expect it. But a younger person, there's a sense that this person's been snatched away from life. And then he even goes on to say in the next line, he kind of repeats it. He says, alas, brother. Right? This is about brother to brother. Unworthily, indigne. So we get the word indignant. Unworthily snatched away from me. Catullus is hurting. And yet he's crafting this poem. He says, now, in the meantime, however, you kind of get these awkward little words piled up. It's almost like I don't know what to say here. Don't know what to do here. But I'm just going to do what our parents have done. That which has been passed down, he says, in the prisco more, in the ancient custom of our parents. But these things that I'm presenting you, this service of death, he said these things are manantia. They are dripping, multum, dripping much, with fraterno fletu, with a brother's tears. And I want you to accept them. Even though he's already said, I know you don't hear me. You can't speak back. So he's obviously doing this as much for himself as he is for his brother. And then comes the beautiful last line, which I have used with other friends who have passed. Et in perpetuum, and into perpetuity, and into eternity, frater. Still the notion, we are brothers, even though we are separated by death. Hail, Ave, or Ave. If you think about the ecclesiastical pronunciation, of course you know that one from the Ave Maria, Hail Mary, right? The words of the angel in the Annunciation to Mary in Luke, the Gospel of Luke. Ave is also the military greeting. Again, Catullus, a soldier, speaking to his brother, fallen soldier. Hail, atque vale, and farewell. That's the goodbye in English. Now, I'm to the point, my dad passed away many years ago. I'm to the point where I can obviously remember my dad and not just, go to pieces. But talk to us a little bit about this poem. Do you feel it? Do you feel the connection? Even though you have nothing to do with Catullus and his ancient Roman or anything else. Can you feel the connection? One man's grief over the death of a loved one, maybe your grief over the death of a loved one. The idea of saying, hail, I salute you, I respect you, but also farewell from, in this case, a brother or a wife or a son or a daughter, whatever. Now, it wouldn't be me doing this video if I didn't touch on something else. Part of the poignancy of this poem hinges on the fact that Catullus clearly does not believe that there is anything after death. Christians do. Christians do. And there was a pastor one time who said, I may be wrong. And you guys who don't believe, Christian faith, whatever, you may be right. But he said, about a minute after we're both dead, we're going to know who was right. And I'm going to put my money on the guy who actually came back from the dead. Right, that's Jesus. Jesus did it. He did it. He transcended that boundary, came back, and offers that gift of life to any who would accept and follow him. So I enjoy the poem very, very much. I enjoy its poignancy. I enjoy its depth. But it has an additional poignancy for me as I think about someone who doesn't know Jesus Christ, has not accepted his gift of salvation. Ooh, beautiful stuff today, folks. Heavy stuff. As Malcolm Guite likes to say, I do these little things in order at last to do nothing. And sometimes we just need to do nothing and reflect on the deeper matters. There's what I like to say in Latin. Parva ago ut tandem, nihil agam. Have a wonderful day, friends.